Episode 20, it's 30 minutes and it's replay to be advised.
Hello, welcome again to the Valley's People. The thing that occurs frequently in this series of programs, the number of people you can find in the Hunter Valley that have world significance and world affiliation. And today from Maitland, we're going to meet one of those, a man who's on the World Council of International Motorcycle Racing. He comes from Maitland. And then from Warners Bay, a man who gets kicks out of music. He gets his kicks out of music by going through people's garages and rubbish dumps. Hope you can stay to meet the guests. Peter, we just had hilarious stories on early. Welcome back to the program. My first guest today is an Australian delegate to the world body which governs motorcycle racing throughout the world. He's a resident of Maitland, Ian Cameron. Welcome to the Valley's People, Ian.
Thank you.
Now, I guess there are just so many aspects of motorcycle racing that you need to qualify exactly the world controlling body. I might have generalised too much.
Well, FIM is the world body, recognised world body, and it comprises 42 countries of the world, and these people have delegates at the FIM conference each year. So it's truly a world organisation.
Yes. And, you know, a lot of people in the Hunter Valley don't seem to realise that we've got people here of stature such as yourself who in fact represent a lot of motorbike riders in Australia and a world body. And I guess to an extent the world body wouldn't be all that enthusiastic about putting an Australian on way down there somewhere at the end of the world.
Well, ACCA has or does issue approximately 10,000 licences each year to people who wish to participate in motorcycle sport. And contrary to what you said, the FIM were very keen to have ACCA directly affiliated.
Good.
Prior to that, we were affiliated through the ACU of Great Britain, and that had been the case since ACCA's inception in 1928. But over the years, the matter of direct affiliation had been considered long before my time, and there was never the money there, or they just didn't go on with it. But in 1975, they took a decision to affiliate direct. And surprisingly, the reception that I got at Berlin at the first conference, I was quite fascinated and amazed.
So we do have a voice.
Oh, indeed. Indeed.
Where were the subsequent conferences held in?
The second one I went to was in Bruges in Belgium. The next one was in Caracas in Venezuela. The next one was Poznan in Poland. Then last year I went to Switzerland.
You'd be the man then to be able to explain or to state once and for all whether in fact Speedway racing under lights began in the world at Maitland.
Well, it is a fact that under electric lights it did start commence in Maitland. You must qualify it by saying under electric lights, because that type of racing on loose dirt tracks was practiced in America and other places in Australia other than Maitland for many years. But as a nighttime entertainment or sport, Maitland was the place where it all started.
Well, why and how? Why Maitland?
Well, the Maitland Showground was controlled by the Hunter River District Horticultural and Agricultural Society, of which my father was a member. And my father was a member of the Maitland Motorcycle Club, which was established many years before that. And Mr. John Hoskins, who came to Maitland and took the position of the secretary of that association, between the two of them, they were instrumental in starting it in Maitland for the Agricultural Society.
So your father, you would have been just a lad at the time, I guess, at Maitland?
Well, I was 9 years of age, and My job at that particular time, so my father would know where I was in the centre of the ring, and with one lap to go I used to ring the bell, similar to what they do at the trots. They did this with the motorcycles.
9-year-old bell ringer, almost like a town crier.
That's right.
And it's a long way since then to Ian Cameron's motorcycle shop in Maitland. You've been with motorcycles all
Well,
your
I've been
life.
in motorcycles and bicycles all my life, and as you say, it's a long way, but it's been a very enjoyable and existing nice experience. If I had my days over, I'd probably do it all over again.
Yes, your friends told me, and believe me, you've got quite a few, your friends told me in Maitland that you're just a mad collector of vintage bikes, and in fact you like travelling around on vintage bikes.
Well, of recent years I've become very interested in vintage motorcycles. I've always had a lot of time for motorcycles, more so than motorcyclists. And in 1972, I think it was, I'd prepared a 1904 FN motorcycle made in Belgium and rode it 1,000 miles from Sydney to Melbourne. The route, it wasn't a direct route, and I've still got that bicycle. In 1978, I'd prepared a 1925 model 350cc Harley Davidson, made it like new, and we rode that in an international rally which went to Toowoomba and back to Southport.
I suppose being a bachelor helps a little bit.
It does indeed. There's not a great deal of ties, and I can get away when I want to.
Yeah, but it's a motorcycle family. It goes back almost, well, to your father, of course, because of the show association in Maitland, and then yourself.
My father joined Bennett and Wood at the turn of the century, and he rode one of the first motorcycles that came to New South Wales.
Yes. Well, as an international delegate representing Australia, could I ask you then, what do you think about 9 and 10 and 11-year-old lads getting their own motorbike, Ian? Is that a right thing for a parent to do?
Well, I feel under right circumstance it's quite a good thing. On the other hand, in some states there are commercial promoters of motorcycle sport who I feel are cashing in on these juveniles, which I don't agree with at all.
What, you mean putting up money for races?
Putting up money for racing and encouraging people to pay money to come and see them, which I don't think is right.
Well, how do you think a lad should get started in that career then if he's going to take up speedway racing?
Well, there's several ways. One, of course, is the fellow who starts in motocross or short circuit racing or something like that, and then, well, enjoys it and sort of make up his mind that, there could be a future in it as a profession. And they move off into the professional field of speedway racing. Jim Airy was a typical example of that. Jim Airy, he's retired now for 4 years, I'd say. But for about 5 years in succession, he was the Australian speedway champion. And he sort of learnt the business or broke his teeth on short circuit. On the other hand, there's a classic example in our own area at Mulbring. Mr. Matt Shields, who many years ago was a top-line short circuit rider and had a family of was at least 2 sons anyhow. David Shields was probably the prominent one, but they built a little track in their property at Mulbring, and he, under his father's guidance, developed sufficient experience and expertise to become a top A grader here, and that same year went off to UK and got a contract with a track over there and raced very successfully for 12 months in England.
Now, you're representing Australia overseas. What aspect, is there anything peculiar that Australia must fight for or needs to supervise?
Well, the structure of FIM is that there are 6 individual committees. There's one that deals purely with road racing.
This is within the world body?
This is at the FIM meetings, yes.
Right.
And it's broken up into these 6 committees who have their own secretary, and all their business is done from Geneva, but it's done by these individual committees. There's one for road racing, there's one for motocross and trials, there's one for speedway and track racing, there's one for promotion, and there's one for finance. And the first few conferences I went to, I was not on a committee, I was merely there as an observer, and I spent most of my time on the CCP committee, which is the one responsible for Speedway and track racing. And on quite a few occasions, the chairman, Paul is, he sort of did me the privilege of asking or seeking advice on certain questions that were being discussed, how it would affect Australia, how it would fit in with Australia's requirements. But then at the Montreux conference in Switzerland last year, I nominated and was elected to the CCR committee, which is the committee responsible for road racing.
Why I asked you that really was the fact that other people had said that Ian Cameron has always been known to speak his mind, and I'm just wondering how you got on when you represented the Australian cyclists there, whether you pull any punches or not.
Well, it depends where they struck me. I'm normally very placid and don't get overexcited, but there are occasions when I sort of might explode.
Are there things that Australia can look forward to, Ian, from your representation? Is there anything being achieved?
Well, we have at the moment an application for the 1982 World's Pairs Final, which hopefully will be promoted to Liverpool Speedway in Sydney.
What's the pairs? Sidecars, is it?
No.
No?
They race teams racing as pairs.
Right.
And if that is a successful meeting, well then we're in line, we hope, for a world individual final in Australia. I wouldn't say where that might be.
No. So there are things coming to Australia from your representation, which is good.
Well, not directly from my representation. See, this World's Championship final in Australia, that was a thought that Frank Arthur had. And Frank Arthur was one of the 12 people that Hoskins took to England in 1928 to launch the Speedway business under electric lights again in England. And Frank Arthur returned and subsequently became involved in promotions, and he was responsible for the Empire Speedway enterprise having the Brisbane Exhibition Ground and the Sydney Showground.
Well, I still think it's something we should be proud of, that
It'd be
an
a good
Australian
thing to do.
delegate is from the Hunter Valley,
If
is
it
from
comes
Maitland.
off, it'll be a very good thing. And up to this point of time, there have been no world championships in any of the motorcycle classes run outside of Europe.
Well, we can look forward to that. And
Well, I hope so.
thank you, Ian Cameron, and congratulations on your appointment to a world body from the Hunter Valley. Welcome back to the Valley's People, and during the break Andrew Lloyd arrived and is presenting us all with some old instruments, and of course this is the thing that he is doing at the moment in the Hunter Valley. From people's garages and I guess in rubbish dumps and everywhere else, Andrew, you're finding instruments such as this one. Isn't that though a little beyond repair?
No, it's although it looks very sad at this stage.
You can say that again.
With probably something like about 20 or 30 hours, that'll come up and be quite a playable instrument. It's a French mandolin, turn of the century, and it'll be very nice.
So you've set yourself out in the task to find these in the Hunter Valley, wherever they may be. Now, where are they, and what are you looking for?
I'm looking for mainly stringed instruments, but also things like concertinas. There's the concertina here. Anything that's an instrument, mainly folk music, due to the fact that I'm interested in folk music, playing and research, etc. And doing the instruments up. They're all over the place. I've brought them from Lochinvar down as far south as the lakes, and up north as far as Lake Macquarie, etc.
And things like this, I mean, it's just, what do you do with this? This just comes out of people's neglect. You know, where do you find an instrument like that, and what will you do with it?
Well, that one actually was given to a friend who's a musician, who said, here you are, you can have that. And I'll make the new bits for it, put a new vellum on it, rebuild the neck, new bits for there, etc. And it'll be a very good old-timey style banjo. The sort of thing you've heard from the south of America.
It seems like this could be a hobby that gets out of hand. I mean, what do you do with all these when you restore them?
Well, I keep one of each instrument for myself, so I can play them. And the others, that when they're done up, they go out into other people's hands. I get the amount of money that it's cost me to do them up and acquire them in the first place, and a little bit of money for tools and things like this. And they get out into other people's hands. It means that there's people with instruments to play, good instruments to play, which otherwise would never have been rescued.
Well, when you take an instrument and you fix it up and you then come, as you've done here, with instruments in the case, I mean, how do they sound when you've finished?
Well, this one's a American mandolin, about 1910 Gibson A model mandolin, which had been, sadly,
Oh no.
that's the original neck, those three pieces.
Where did that just thrown away by somebody, was it?
No, it had been saved. The fellow that had it realised it was a good mandolin, and the body was in reasonably good condition, but the neck, of course, was absolutely useless. So when I found it, I got it off him, built a new neck for it, and it's now played by probably the best mandolin player in Newcastle. The reason I've got it at the moment is that he wore the frets out on it in about a year and a half with that much playing.
Well, how's it sound, Andrew? Yeah, fantastic. Have you had any discoveries? You know, the mind, I suppose, comes from reading too much imaginative literature, that you might come against some rare instrument somewhere?
Well, yes, there's rare instruments about. This one here that I'm doing up at the moment, it's 180 years old. It was built in Dublin, Ireland in 1800, of course. And as you can see, it's had numerous repairs over its life, and it was in a very sad and sorry condition, but in a month or two it'll be going again. And to me, that is a discovery in any case.
Of course, I suppose a lot of the early history of the Hunter Valley brought people here, particularly with music backgrounds, and they brought instruments with them.
Of course, there was the early immigrants. Of course, the convicts weren't allowed to bring instruments, but the other people did, and did bring instruments. And there's quite a few good instruments in Australia, in various places. They've been tucked away now for ages, a lot of them, because they haven't been played. But there's the occasional Stradivarius, etc. violin. There was one found in Melbourne. I doubt if I'll find one, but
You're looking.
I'm looking.
Well, how does the fiddle sound when you finished it, Andrew, from the state that you get it in?
They come up rather nice. Some of them, of course, don't. You find a lot of cheap violins, but some of them are reasonably good.
Yes, because you're playing folk music, and you did on both those examples, I guess you're interested in our heritage in music.
Yes, I'm actually Welsh. I came out from Wales when I was about 3, and my father came out for only a short period and decided to stay. And I was brought up with music, folk music, as well as church music, which I learnt a lot of when I was in the choir at Newcastle. And when the folk revival started, I got interested in it and was playing a lot of folk music, and because there was folk music being played, I went looking for instruments.
And where do you search? Where do you start? You just don't put, or do you put an ad in the paper and you start from there?
Ads in the paper. Word of mouth. Wherever I go, I tell people, ask, have you got a violin in your backyard, sort of thing. And every now and then somebody says, yes. Do you want it? Yes, I want it. Especially if you haven't got any massive sentimental value attached to it. If it's, if it's worth $1 million, I'm not really interested in it because I can't afford that much money. But I want to find any old instrument and get it going and get it back into somebody else's hands so that there's music being made by people in the Hunter Valley.
That's the thing that's impressed me somewhat about yourself, is that you're not really just building and storing, are you? You're building and putting the music back into the Hunter Valley.
Well, the instruments are made to be played, not to be hung on walls and put under beds. They should be played. And I agree with the builders. It may be that I have something, a feeling with the builders, and consequently I feel they should be played.
A lot of people could have the motivation of repairing instruments, but where did you get the skills to repair instruments?
Well, my father worked with his hands. I learnt working with my hands when I was young. Maybe that comes into it. Maybe there's an amount of inherent skill. And by practice, I've made a lot of mistakes. Sadly, I've had my successes. In that way, and by reading books like, this is a book written many, many years ago, Violin Making As It Was and As It Is, and the book itself was originally published about 1800, so...
As it was, and published in 1800.
It's as it was and as it was, rather than as it is. And reading magazines, there's magazines put out in America that of interest to people that work on instruments. There's a Luth Association of luthiers in Australia. We all talk about instruments. There's a group in Newcastle of 10 or 12 people who are interested in instruments. That's making them, repairing them, collecting them. We all get together, swap timber, swap ideas, sometimes swap instruments.
Have you had a chance to study some of those great musical moments in the past? Because you had things like accordion bands and mandolin bands on the coalfields, and sort of in those days they were rather huge concerts, weren't they?
Well, it's quite funny. There was a fellow, Gapinko, up in Curry, Cessnock, and he eventually went back down and lived in Sydney. And he was instrumental, virtually, to coin a word.
That's a good one.
In forming the Curry Mandolin Orchestra, the Cessnock Orchestra, and a number of other orchestras around the place. And I've met a few of the old people from those, both of those orchestras that I mentioned, and got instruments from them, not necessarily directly. One of my friends knew Matt. I forget Matt's second name at the moment, and he had a banjo mando cello, sometimes called a banjo mando, and it's a mandolin, but it's a banjo, but it's bigger than a mandolin. A weird instrument, but a beautiful instrument, and it took something like about 60 hours to get it going again. It had been in the hands of someone that had not done quite the right thing by it. And talking to Matt was so glad to see this instrument going again, you know?
Yes.
He had only lent it to this friend of mine, and as soon as he heard it played again, he said, "It's yours," you know? If you're going to play it, it's yours, because it's alive again, it's not dead. And that's the sort of thing that really thrills me.
Yes. So much of our heritage, of course, does go to the garbage dump, doesn't it, in clean-outs?
Oh, yes.
And it's how much of the valley haven't you canvassed yet? Is there plenty of scope for more discovery?
Well, there are a lot of instruments going to the tip every day.
Well,
sadly, you're not allowed to collect them from the tip, but once they get to the tip, even if they're in that state, they're worth keeping, but they quite often just get buried.
Yes, under the bulldozers we'll find them. That's a shame, isn't it? So, how do you, as a one-man organisation, really, how are you going to extract all these other instruments that must be just lying under people's beds and things?
Oh, it's not strictly a one-man organisation. There's quite a group of us that are collecting the instruments before they get destroyed. But if people want to throw them on the tip, please give me a call and I'll come and have a look at them, and maybe they are only worth throwing on the tip, but maybe they're worth fixing.
Andrew, the instruments that you fix, you said earlier that you fix an instrument and nothing really gives you as much joy as passing it on to someone who's going to get that instrument played again and learn music through that piece of someone's craft. Have you had any success in that way? Have you been able to get people started that you can take an interest in?
Well, did find a fiddle for a young fellow. He was about, I think he was about 14 or 15 at the time. He wanted to learn the fiddle. I found him this fiddle, a reasonably good one, got it going, put it into his hands. He's 16 or so now, and now he's one of the most promising fiddle players in Newcastle. He's that good at 16 that he's able to play for people to dance. Now, that might not sound tremendous, but he's only been playing for 2 years. That's tremendous. Yeah. He's now after another fiddle because he wants one that's better.
Yes, you obviously coming through, you can feel this yourself. Sort of a motive link you have with this sort of thing.
Well, I've played music, and I've played in bands for dancing, and it's a tremendous thrill to have people enjoy themselves to the music that you're making. And to make it that possible by putting the instrument into someone's hands is a thrill as well.
Yeah. Well, it's sure a thrill to find the number of people in the Hunter Valley who've got a vocation which is going to help generations to come, and Andrew Lloyd, you're one of those. Thanks for appearing in our program today.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Our guest today, firstly Ian Cameron from Maitland, who's reached the status of Australian delegate to World Speedway and Cycle Racing. And also, as we've just heard, from Andrew Lloyd from Warners Bay in Charlestown area, that is collecting old instruments throughout the Hunter Valley. Maybe you can help him. And maybe you can join us again on the next program of The Valley's People. I hope so. Goodbye for now.